Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Antonio Segura nervously drummed his fingers on the smooth lid of an expensive case. He was terribly annoyed by the forced sit-ins at the airport. Even the cozy pre-holiday atmosphere on the eve of the winter holidays in the cafe didn't please him. This trip to Munich was very important for his company. Bad weather with a suddenly raging heavy snowstorm had messed up all his plans. Pushing away his cup of coffee, the man once again mentally went through the contract's clauses. The document was hard-earned, he knew it almost by heart. His team had tried to account for every nuance of the deal. Everyone understood that the gateway to Europe would increase the company's profits and improve the well-being of his employees. Even the signing of the papers was timed for Catholic Christmas, when the meticulous Germans become softer and kinder. Perhaps the winter fairy tale would work here too, and the service customers would agree to all the offered terms? No need to look for compromises. He had planned to fly a couple of days earlier, but he was troubled by Josefa's behavior. His wife had been acting strange lately. She muttered something about her mother's illness, whom they had recently moved from their small homeland closer to them. The elderly woman flatly refused to leave her land, her flowers, and her beds. Luckily, Senor Segura managed to find a suitable option in a small town-like village. A cute wooden house, resembling a log cabin, with 8 coveted acres, a favorable climate for agricultural experiments. Manuela Jimenez ran out of arguments against moving as soon as she saw her new home. Senora Jimenez looked quite healthy and spirited, she didn't complain about her health at all. Why then did Josefa start this strange conversation with him today? Antonio, she rarely called him so formally, usually Tony or Tonito. I will need to live with Mom for a while she undergoes examination at the district hospital. You don't mind, do you? He was puzzled right away. And why does she need to have tests and see doctors at the district medical facility? Let her come to us in the city. Here the specialists are better, and the laboratories have cooler capabilities. But Josefa looked at him with some glassy, unseeing eyes. She kept twirling her favorite statue of Terpsichore, holding a lyre in her elegant stone hands. Antonio watched her movements mesmerized, until the woman's slender fingers unclasped. The image of the muse of dance crashed to the floor, shattering into hundreds of tiny, dust-like fragments. Josefa flinched in fear, bursting into loud sobs. Josefa, this was his wife's pet name. Don't you dare be upset. I will bring you a new one from Italy, just the same. I remember perfectly which store I bought it from. Yes, Antonio, thank you. But I'm upset for a different reason. About Mom. What if the doctor's verdict is disheartening, the data shows something serious, and we can't cope with it? Getting examined close to home was her decision. You know her character, she could command an army if needed. Cast aside all doubts, dear, and together we will overcome any obstacle, any trouble. Trust me. Senor Segura switched from thinking about the last conversation with his wife to the passing waitress. Please, bring me another cup of strong coffee. This time with cream and sugar. Everything suggests that I'll have to sit here quite a bit longer. The man followed the girl in the uniform with his gaze as she left to fulfill an order, and then he paused abruptly. Behind the glass partition that separated the cafe area and the seats with passengers in the departure hall, he glimpsed and immediately lost sight of his wife's face. It couldn't be. A delusion, a mistake. That morning, he had personally put her on the commuter train heading towards the region. He waited until the automatic doors slammed shut and the train smoothly moved away along the tracks. In his head, it flashed. This almost sleepless night is taking its toll. I spent all evening calming Josefa down until she fell asleep on my shoulder, and at 5 a.m, the alarm already rang. Everything that followed happened in a bit of a rush and hustle. But his legs did not listen to his reasonable arguments. Quickly leaving a bill on the table, Antonio rushed to catch up with his vision, so resembling his wife. They had been together for almost 10 years, he could not mistake another woman for his beloved half. To his surprise, in a couple of minutes, he realized that indeed, a few meters ahead of him, his wife, his Josefa, was walking through the hall like a sleepwalker, seeing nothing, noticing nothing around her. Her hat on her lush hair was askew, a long scarf uncoiled like a snake dragged on the floor, half the buttons on her light fluffy coat undone. Something told Antonio that now was not the time to call out, to stop Josefa. He would follow her, whatever he might learn. 20 meters behind him, they finally announced the beginning of registration for the flight departing to Munich. The blizzard outside had finally abated, the sky was starting to clear. Snow removal machines were busily at work on the airfield. Senor Segura didn't care about anything happening around him. He felt with a loving heart that Josefa had some trouble, in which there was no place for him. And now he was determined to find out everything to the end. He would deal with the contract later. Josefa stepped into the school of ballroom dancing when she was 4 years old. Senora Jimenez, who had given birth to a daughter from a passing young man, was told by the pediatrician at the first checkup, "Your girl is so beautifully built, you could send her to the ballet right now." Manuela smiled to herself and summarized, "For only good reason I shared a bed with a circus acrobat." Although Josefa's father disappeared from her horizon right after the tour ended, he left a wonderful gift. Not every circus cashier has such temporary romance with visiting artists. And though he wasn't much to look at, always appearing in the ring in a mask, his body was perfect. He passed on the best he had to his little girl. Josefa was born when her mother had already turned 30. No suitors had ever been observed nearby. Senora Jimenez had always resembled a perpetually serious old lady. Who in their right mind would covet such a treasure? And it was only after a couple of shots of vodka and after the performance that the rather mature acrobat noticed the quiet cashier, not immediately, of course. The long-standing habit of suppressing adrenaline with alcohol was not considered shameful in the troupe. After all, everyone has their way of treating nerves. As long as there are results. The love affair between the unattractive female cashier and the dashing acrobat was short-lived. Manolita didn't even realize at first that she was pregnant. But without a doubt, she decided to keep the child, someone to bring her a glass of water in her old age. That seems to be what single people say. Cruel but true. Senora Jimenez was a strict mother, keeping her daughter in check from an early age. All you could hear was, "Put that bun down, you can't have it. Don't overdo the sweets, you have a great future in the world of dance. Sit down, fidget, and listen to the music. Your prospective profession is nothing without music." The pediatrician's words about Josefa left such a strong impression on Manuela that she never doubted her daughter would become an outstanding ballerina, travel the world with her mother, garnering flowers and ovations from fans. And she, the mother, would bask in her glory, offering a warm sweater when her daughter felt cold, sorting gifts and presents from admirers of the light elf in a white ballet dress. It didn't work out. At the ballet school audition for young talents, the girl was praised but told she did not meet the physical requirements. The ballet master's conclusion sounded like a sentence. "Your girl will never be able to fully open her legs in the position called en dehors, outward. It will prevent her from performing pirouettes and tours qualitatively. Even if her supporting leg and end tournament doesn't fail her, the rotation and the turn, she is unlikely to succeed." Manuela didn't understand all these nuances, but one thing became clear: her daughter would not become the prima ballerina of any opera or ballet theater. If she pursued this path, even with determination to conquer this Olympus, her eternal fate would be the chorus line, the backdrops, the second and third rows of ballerinas on stage. Then why start? Josefa's persistent mother was not ready to give up her dreams for anything. A month later, the girl was already attending ballroom dance classes. The training was not as grueling, and the outcome looked even more beautiful. Passionate tango, tender waltz, fiery rumba, Latin American pasodoble, classic foxtrot. The small local school did not prepare future stars of the dance floor or focus on the sports components of this type of dance. Here, they simply meticulously taught grace, harmony, refinement, and the skill to move virtuously to the music. These magical classes quickly transported Josefa, who looked nothing like her parents, into a real fairy tale. Paired with the handsome Rui, they soon set the tone for all other participants. They were the ones to emulate, to be like. Their peers even childishly envied them a bit. Josefa and Rui glided too beautifully across the shiny smooth parquet. They looked too good and complimented each other too well. The days between regular school and dance studio flew by for Josefa in an instant. She hardly noticed how she started first grade. She remembered little on the crest of constant competitions, performances, and ovations for their amazing duo in the following years. Seasons changed outside the window, the country made history, but the dance duo continued to create miracles. Luxurious costumes, elegant shoes, a natural ability to present themselves in the best light. That's what accompanied the two gifted dancers. It was about them that the words were once said in a popular ad, "Let the whole world wait." Josefa and Rui were inseparable friends, even though they attended different schools and often did their homework together. They were welcome in each other's homes. Their mothers were also well acquainted. Somehow, it just happened that Rui's mother also raised him alone. He barely remembered his father, who once went to work in the capital and then vanished into its vast expanses. No letters, no money, no other messages. They were even divorced without either being present at the relevant authorities. The father was there and then gone. Rui and Josefa, spending almost all their time together, naturally and inevitably turned into two 15-year-old teenagers in love. Their romantic story began with their first shy kiss. Then, as it should be, there were flowers, fruits, because calorie-dense sweets had to be excluded from their diet. Trips to the cinema, to youth parties. Friends were very keen to invite the couple. No need to spend on drinks and snacks for them, but how spectacularly they could dance for the invited audience, how wonderfully they could adorn the evening. By this time, their dance teacher had identified that what they excelled at most was performing the tango known as milonguero. This skillful move, depicting passion between a man and a woman, had been around for over half a century. The world's best couples endeavored to learn this captivating dance, especially if the partners harbored even the beginnings of romantic affection. In the sentimental, somewhat enchanting swirl on the floor, Josefa and Rodrigo's shoulders were tightly pressed together, creating special warm embraces, an irresistible attraction of two bodies. The rules of this tango called for maximum closeness. The boy was young, handsome, healthy. The girl was endlessly beautiful, fresh, attractive. Hormones inside them beckoned. What was almost inevitable happened. After a date under the moonlight after class, Rui couldn't hold back. Josefa didn't step away, they became intimate. Josefa never had heart-to-heart talks with her mother about such matters. There was no one to teach the young inexperienced girl the basics of safety for such a case. The young ballroom dance enthusiast became pregnant almost immediately, and that's when her personal hell began. Sonora Jimenez was furious, screaming, "How could you? You've thrown your entire career away. You'll forever ruin your figure, change outwardly, lose all the charm of your grace. You've waited until it's too late. Now an official abortion is impossible, only for medical reasons. And you're absolutely healthy." Rodrigo also behaved poorly. He trembled like a leaf, afraid to admit to his mother that he was going to be a father soon. He felt completely unprepared for such a turn of events in his relationship with Josefa. After all, this wasn't like dancing a fiery tango together. This was a completely different kind of responsibility. Sonora Jimenez mobilized all her connections in medical circles. Taking the risk, inducing labors none of her acquaintances agreed even for a significant reward. There could be no talk of an early marriage. Moreover, Rui suddenly disappeared in an unknown direction. He even began skipping ballroom dance classes without valid reasons or explanations. And Josefa was visibly gaining weight, swelling before everyone's eyes. It became impossible to hide the truth in educational institutions any longer. Josefa temporarily left school. There was too much whispering behind her back from both students and teachers. Only Rodrigo's mother remained calm and composed upon hearing the news, even beaming with joy. My boy, this is a blessing when the heavens grant a loving couple a child. Not always does a baby come into this world strictly according to the schedule, in line with the planned dates and terms. She took her son by the hand and led him to Josefa and her mother's house. Her proposal was as follows. Senora Jimenez, Chipa, Rue, and I cannot remain on the sidelines at such a difficult time for you. We've come to express our support and find out about your further plans. A very joyful and important event awaits us all. Rodrigo slightly cringed at her words, which did not escape Josefa's mother's notice. She sneered maliciously, and Senora Jimenez's response shocked all present. Let's not make a celebration out of the arrival of our grandson. He was destined to ruin my girl's life. I already have no familial feelings for this baby. My daughter will give up the child at the maternity hospital immediately, and this is not up for discussion. Senora Jimenez could have sworn she saw a glimmer of relief in Rue's eyes. The boy clearly was not ready to become a father. Such a decision by Josefa's mother suited him in every way. The future mother herself stood like a silent statue, not a drop of blood in her face, no reflection of any emotions in her eyes. She resembled a mechanical robot, forced to witness a conversation of completely strange, unknown people. There were no hints of maternal instinct in her at all. It was impossible to understand what she was thinking about. Josefa later recalled this conversation many times, trying to identify what her own decision would have been. But memory stubbornly remained silent, as if shielding itself from the cuckoo mother who decided to betray her child while still pregnant. Unexpectedly and assertively, Rodrigo's mother interrupted Senora Jimenez's unpleasant monologue. The bloodline growing inside you, Josefa, cannot be defeated by your evil intention as long as I'm alive and walking this earth. You can now jointly refuse the poor baby who has yet to see this world. I will take care of everything myself. My grandchild, whether a boy or a girl, since you've intentionally decided not to know the baby's gender in advance, will live with me. Even if the rest of the world refuses to help me. This includes you, Rue. You're free to leave if you don't want to be a father, but then forget that you've been my son for so many years. I couldn't have raised a treacherous person capable of so easily abandoning his own child. She looked around the room once more. All three remained motionless. Proudly lifting her head, the woman walked to the exit. Prepare the paperwork for the official renunciation of the newborn well in advance, so there are no delays later. At least a draft, a sample. I'm a lawyer, so I'll handle the paperwork with the guardianship authorities myself. And you, Rodrigo, have time to think until tomorrow. Reconsider the situation, weigh everything, and make your final decision. Despite her external elegance and grace, Josefa was a strong, athletic girl. She gave birth easily and quickly, without any complications. The last thing she heard about her newborn son was the midwife's report. It's a boy. 53 centimeters long, weighing 3 kilograms 600 grams. Not a giant, but a healthy average boy. Thanks to her mother's diligent efforts, Josefa never saw her baby again. She just signed the documents to relinquish him. Senora Jimenez desperately feared that her daughter might develop maternal feelings. She thwarted any attempt at contact between Josefa and the child from the start. She gave such a stern look to the nurse trying to show the boy to his young mother that the woman, far from being faint-hearted, nearly sank through the floor. She took her daughter home from the hospital at the first opportunity, adhering to the principle, out of sight, out of mind. Nicholas was taken from the maternity hospital by his father and grandmother Rita. Margarita Sevilla, a lawyer with years of experience, a savvy legal expert, managed to arrange the documents for the baby in no time. Rodrigo could not yet boast that paternal feelings had taken a firm place in his heart. But he was never truly mean or indifferent. After that rebuke from Senora Jimenez, he didn't take long to decide. He weighed the benefits, like beads on a string. I'll become a father at 16, so be it, since it happened. I despise myself for showing weakness. But it's happiness to have a son. We'll play football together. If it's a daughter, I'll dress her in a beautiful dress and take her to the park for carousel rides. How good it is that my mother turned out to be such a wise grandmother. Now we'll live together, the three of us, we'll make it work. After giving birth, Hosea remained in a daze for a long time. She changed schools to avoid gossip, continued to attend ballroom dancing but with a new partner. It wasn't the same as with Rue. The new boy was diligent, but she secretly called him a blockhead. He meticulously calculated all his movements, but without genuine internal emotions, making the dance seem frozen, lifeless, and the audience could immediately feel it. Even their teacher noticed, remarking, "You two, my dears, resemble wet chickens. You're not dancing tango, you're serving a sentence in a poultry yard. I can't even nominate you for the competition this time. You'd disgrace my professional reputation. From you, Hosea, I didn't expect such coldness in the Milonguero tango. And your rumba looks like an iceberg. A little more and you'll completely lose all your brilliant skills in ballroom dancing." Sonora Jimenez, who had sacrificed all her moral principles on the altar of Josefa's career, was shocked. Her daughter no longer wanted to go to the studio, took no joy in new outfits for performances, seriously dialed back her efforts in academic school. She viewed her mediocre grades calmly and spent all her free time at the computer, playing some silly games or wandering the winding paths of social networks. Occasionally, she engaged in casual virtual conversations. Otherwise, she was closed off, isolated, not maintaining relationships with any peers. No friends, no suitors. A solitary wildflower. She barely graduated from school. She told her mother that she intended to apply to the Institute of Theatrical Arts, to a department preparing teachers of choreographic disciplines. The entrance score for this university was quite high, but Hosea hoped her portfolio, brimming with dance competition awards, would suffice. Her assumptions proved correct, but in a different way than expected. Her entry into the institute was facilitated by the patronage of Senor Segura, a wealthy benefactor who acted as the main sponsor of the university. Antonio, a successful businessman with a wealth of talent in the event business, was nearly 30 years old at the time. Under his authoritative hand, his own network of agencies had grown and multiplied in just a few years. In 3 decades of life, he had absorbed the best from his conductor father and violinist mother, and he had a profound understanding of theatrical art, having grown up behind the scenes of the local dramatic realm of Melpomene. With plenty of free time after school, the boy, and later the young man, roamed the theater's nooks without any hindrance. He was an assistant to the lighting crew, in the costume department, and even in the buffet. With his attractive appearance, he managed to appear in a comedy magazine, advertisements, and as an extra in the creation of music videos. Such guys are usually said to be shooting everywhere. He quickly became a well-known figure in the local bohemian circles. Despite his external charm and charisma, he was extremely selective about who he allowed close to him. Full openness was out of the question. Senor Segura's career was smooth sailing from the start. He knew how to surround himself with conscientious people. He had an unerring ability to spot the most honest and loyal candidates for a vacancy in his company among the crowd. Endlessly creative, though he graduated from the economics department of the university, he was loved by money. Barely starting his business from scratch, organizing the first celebratory events and joyful parties almost on a whim, he navigated by his intuition masterfully. Upon first meeting a future client, he soon knew and felt what they would like. Antonio served on the admissions committee of the Institute of Theatrical Arts not for the first time. He usually set himself the task of finding new, unspoiled talents, not yet corrupted by fame and brass bands. Most of the time, among the applicants, he found such unpolished diamonds. This time, Hosea captured his imagination. He watched her every move as soon as she entered the room. Her graceful posture, her airy gait, almond-shaped doe eyes, a mane of fluffy hair. He liked everything about this girl. If someone had whispered to him then, "You, dear Senor Segura, have fallen for the young applicant at first sight," he would have nodded in agreement. Hosea mesmerized him, attracted him, called to him. So, when it turned out she could not enter the institute on a scholarship due to her scores, and she didn't have the means for paid education, he invited her for a serious talk. Antonio disliked delaying matters. Josefa was incredibly surprised to be asked to visit the choreography department. It seemed her fate was sealed. She hadn't scored enough. She could pack her things in the dormitory and boldly return home. Sonora Jimenez would lament that even these plans to be closer to the creative Olympus had gone awry. But somewhere up in the heavens, her guardian angel pleaded for leniency on her behalf. Everything turned out differently. Josefa was led to the head of the department's office. The secretary unexpectedly offered her coffee, asking the girl to wait a bit. Then, a young and very attractive man entered the room. Even Josefa, not versed in male beauty, immediately felt that she was facing a paragon of that special allure that usually appeals to the female gender. Tall, athletic, impeccably dressed, he smiled charmingly and effortlessly, displaying a perfect row of pearly white teeth. He started the conversation directly. "Good afternoon. I've thoroughly reviewed your portfolio, photos, awards from competitions. Our company is currently in need of a specialist of your kind. Not someone who is merely familiar with dance technique by hearsay. Someone else who has himself gone through the crucible of hard gliding across the dance floor, well acquainted with the steps, the details of movement in all classic ballroom dances, as well as all the modern trends in this area. We would like to offer you a targeted admission for study at this institute." Josefa couldn't believe her ears. A company wanted to take her under its wing as a potential employee and was willing to finance her studies at the institute. This unexpected benefactor, now resembling a wizard from a fairy tale to Josefa, continued. "Our firm will rent a one-bedroom apartment for you. Initially, you will have a flexible office attendance schedule, with piece rate paid based on the completion of our clients' orders." Josefa listened to her future boss, continually pinching herself. Was she asleep, or were all these generous offers just a dream? Her mother would go crazy with such news. Grandmother Rita, the strict lawyer Sonora Sevilla, often smiled to herself, delighted that the joyful ringing of a child's voice filled their home. Her grandson grew up calm, slept well at night, eagerly ate his baby formula, and patiently gazed at the bright rattles hanging over his crib when the adults were a bit busy. Rui adored little Nicholas. The boy grew up amusing, resembling a dandelion. A fuzz of thin light hair, huge blue eyes, mischievous freckles, and a body as if on hinges. The child was always where his father was busy. Rui barely managed to hide his cell phone, keys, pliers, screwdriver, and a box of small items like nails and screws. Nicholas wanted to be just like his father, never letting him out of his sight. He was his god, his role model, his idol. With his son in his arms, the young man finished school. Alongside his elder buddy, Nicholas proudly walked to the draft board when his father was conscripted into the army, and then, with his grandmother, they greeted the matured father at the train station. He recognized him immediately, even shedding a tear when he hugged his returning father's strong neck. They became inseparable, and Rui often thought, how could I have been so lost upon learning I was going to have a child? Though my romance with Josefa, the tangos, and waltzes were merely a dalliance. A son is a different matter, important, tender. How much did his mother lose by never knowing the wonder of holding a gentle, affectionate, trusting dandelion in her arms? Through mutual acquaintances, Rui learned that Josefa was studying at the Institute of Theatrical Arts, following her passion for choreography. She rarely visited her mother in their hometown. Apparently, she was even planning to get married. As for Josefa, she lived like in paradise. Senor Segura from the start surrounded her with such care and attention that the romance that blossomed between them surprised no one in his circle. He adored his beloved, showered her with gifts, took her to exotic resorts, dressed her like a beautiful doll in all the best attire. The young woman didn't even remember her son. She erased him from her life as an annoying hindrance to her happiness. Rui unsuccessfully attempted to enroll in a technical university a couple of times, but failed to meet the admission scores each time. Having graduated from high school with less than stellar grades, his failure was predictable. He even tried to get a job as a security guard but faced rejection there too. Without having the right connections, it was difficult to secure a position even in that field. Sonora Sevilla recently suffered from high blood pressure, the stress of defending clients in often complex criminal cases taking its toll. She had always devoted her heart and soul to her profession, experiencing the courtroom dramas personally and trying to understand every nuance. She was respected for her fearlessness and her dedication to pulling her defendants through to the end, striving to soften their sentences whenever possible. She knew that not everyone ends up on the wrong path willingly. Life circumstances push people toward mistakes without asking for permission, and fate plays its cruel games. Everyone has their own path to tread. Unexpected encounters in the criminal world suddenly helped Rodrigo with finding a job. Sonora Sevilla once ran into her godson, who had served time for a serious fight, at the supermarket. They chatted, shared recent news, and she mentioned her son couldn't find work after the army. The man's response surprised and pleased her. "You honestly helped me get a lighter sentence for causing serious bodily harm to someone. You managed to prove it was excessive self-defense. I don't want to remain in your debt. I own a company that trains stuntmen for extreme shooting. We're always in need of strong, athletic guys." Within 6 months, Rui was trusted with the most dangerous tasks on the most challenging courses. Agile as a panther, strong as a lion, and additionally handsome, he was in high demand. Extra money started coming into the family, and Rui found himself surrounded by long-legged beauties who loved to be seen in restaurants and nightclubs with muscular escorts. Sonora Sevilla was both pleased and displeased with her son's rapid success. Now, in addition to worrying about his job, she was constantly waiting for Rui to return from shoots and parties. More often she found herself putting the growing Nicholas to bed, who didn't want to sleep without his dad. Rita felt bitter for the boy. Somewhere, his mother lived carefree, never once coming to see the boy, and now his father was also drifting away, getting caught up in a life filled with sharp adrenaline. Antonio suddenly braked. Josefa, walking ahead of him in the airport hall, suddenly pulled a cell phone from her coat pocket. After pressing the screen and waiting for a response, she began to speak rapidly. "I'll be there soon, hold on, Rui. We'll definitely figure something out. I'll help. I won't leave Nicholas, I promise you." Senor Segura was confused. Rui, Nicholas, who were they? He had never heard these names from his wife. Nor had Sonora Jimenez mentioned anything similar. What secrets did his wife have from him? They had been together for 10 years. He couldn't recall a single instance when Josefa had given him any reason to suspect her of any wrongdoing. Right after they met, he didn't pursue her or scare her with intrusive courtship, didn't embarrass her with too blatant stares. The girl turned out to be remarkably sensible here. As always, he wasn't mistaken. She was quickly accepted into the team. At the next celebration they prepared for quite demanding clients. She performed a solo dance in the style of passionate romantic tango. Alone, without a partner, turning the performance into a solo female act. The celebration was dedicated to the wedding anniversary of a wealthy couple. After the party, the clients expressed a desire to learn the basic moves of the Milonguero tango, so much did her performance captivate the imaginations of the celebrants and their guests. Then there was a lot more work, hustle, organizing celebrations, banquets, corporate events. Their job was like an eternal festival. Bright, lively, colorful. Senor Segura often took an active part in preparing events that took place in their city. His loyal assistants watched over the branches. Working with him in event planning was considered an undeniable fortune by the employees. An accident helped him get closer to Josefa. At that moment, they were jointly preparing a wedding feast in the spirit of Latin American motifs. The clients insisted that their thematic evening include a complete quintet of dances: pasadable, jive, cha-cha-cha, samba, and rumba. Josefa wore herself out trying to teach young dancers in the studio to perform this order decently. Late in the evening, Senor Segura offered to drive Josefa home. They started talking in the car and couldn't stop, they were so comfortable together. The man was very pleased that he had never rushed the woman he was in love with. Josefa yielded to him slowly, gradually, but with evident pleasure. Antonio and Josefa never had what you'd call traditional dates. They worked hard together and then relaxed together. After living together for a year in a civil union, they went ahead and got officially married at the registry office without pomp, a large number of guests, or a raucous celebration. They had enough festivities at work. Antonio knew one thing for sure: if Josefa was undeniably his woman, his beloved. At work, in bed, and everyday life. Even the prim and goal-driven Sonora Jimenez, with her eternal grandmotherly demeanor, immediately accepted her son-in-law and her daughter's choice. She could have never dreamed that her Chipo would marry such a wealthy and respectable man. Now, 10 years into their marriage, they were raising a son and daughter, aged 7 and 3. They lived in a large country house with an endless yard. Gazebos, a barbecue area, an indoor and outdoor pool, and a separate house for the staff were all taken for granted. They never boasted about any of it. Often, they didn't even notice many of these things in their busyness. Antonio persistently tried to persuade his parents to move in with them for the fresh air. But no way. They didn't want to spend so much time traveling to their beloved theater, where they both still worked. Josefa was still dancing, and Senor Segura, who had never burdened Josefa with household chores before, now that they had recently moved to a new house, did so even less. Under his wife's genial command were a housekeeper and a chef, a gardener, several stalwart guards, a nanny, and a governess for the children. Their yard was also full of pets. In this harmonious furry company coexisted 2 dogs, 3 cats, and 1 agile hamster. The children were thrilled with their little friends. And this idol, created by Antonio with such love, was crumbling. Senor Segura followed Josefa almost on tiptoes, although he found this detective following distasteful. A feverish whirl of thoughts spun in his head. Has my wife had a lover in her hometown all this time, since she's now bought a ticket in that direction? She used to go there to visit her mother, so she could very well have secretly met with him. His palms suddenly broke out in a sweat despite the winter chill. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. Should he call out to Josefa now? Silently and unnoticeably follow her to her destination? What secrets was his wife keeping from him? His beloved woman, in whom he had infinite trust. Deciding to confront everything at the airport seemed excessive. He disliked public scenes. He easily purchased a ticket on the same flight but at the tail of the liner. Josefa, as before, was like a robot. She didn't look around, noticed nothing. Antonio even felt sorry for her, but then scolded himself. This woman had been deceiving him for years. If he caught her in infidelity, he would never forgive her. They flew to Josefa's hometown without incident. Considering that all their luggage fit and carry on, they almost walked together to the taxi stand. Josefa even glanced in his direction several times. Senor Segura tensed each time, thinking, this is it, she'll see me now. But nothing of the sort happened. His wife remained blind, still not seeing the light of day. Then he almost lost her in the crowd, barely managing to get into a car to follow the taxi Josefa got into. The drive was short. Antonio was poorly oriented in the almost unfamiliar city. Josefa's taxi slowed down near a panel apartment building. She pulled a small notebook from her purse and started checking the address. The man was confused. Was she here for the first time? Then whom had she flown here to save? Neither Sonora Jimenez, Nina Rumarovna, nor Rodrigo knew that. In fact, Josefa had been carefully and secretly following her son's fate for all these 11 years since she gave birth to Nicholas. The technique was simple. She had made friends with a little girl living next door to Rui and his mother in her childhood. They met in an interesting manner. At that time, Sonora Sevilla and her son still lived in a private house. One day, Josefa noticed 2 curious eyes watching their training session in the garden from behind the fence. Approaching the picket fence, smiling, she asked, "What's this, a partisan we have hiding in ambush here?" The narrow boards of the fence shifted in response to her question, revealing the head of an embarrassed girl. "I'm Lucha. I live here with my mom and dad. You dance so beautifully to the cassette player, like a prince and princess in a fairy tale." Josefa laughed. "So this is our grateful audience and fan. Come over, Lucha. We'll dance again just for you." Back then, Josefa could not have guessed that the young neighbor would become her faithful ally and assistant. Even a whole 5 years of age difference would not be an obstacle. The girl would appear at her post with enviable persistence, chatting with them about her simple childhood matters during breaks between Rue and Josefa's rehearsals. She would not change her affection for them even at 10 years old, when Josefa gave birth to Nicholas and the boy moved into Sonora Sevilla's house. The dedicated fan of the dance talent of the beautiful duo would later emerge in the young mother's life like a wild whirlwind. It was she who figured out that Josefa secretly came to Rue's house to see the boy, let her into her yard, and would constantly support and help her, staying informed about everything happening with the neighbors. Meeting Josefa accidentally on the street, she would throw her arms around her neck. "I know everything. You and Rue had a son, and you fought. You're missing him. Tell me honestly, do you miss him?" "I did everything wrong," Josefa honestly answered her little friend. "I made a mistake and don't know how to fix it. Mom monitors my every move. Being at home in this uncertainty is unbearable." Lucha looked at her with serious, somehow grown-up eyes. "I'll be here, Josefa. I'll tell you everything I can see and find out about Nicholas." Sometime after this conversation, Josefa slipped into Lucha's house like an unnoticed shadow when her parents were not home. She helped the girl set up a social media page. Now her faithful assistant would send daily reports on how Nicholas was doing. Years passed in lively personal correspondence. During this time, Josefa literally became one with the short messages from Lucha. She knew everything or almost everything about her dandelion, but never dared to change the situation or claim her rights to her son. Initially, she was still a very inexperienced teenager, terrified that her mother would find out about her endeavors and cut off the only thread that connected her with Nicholas. Then everything went too far: studies, meeting Antonio, marriage, having children. Antonio never delved into his wife's correspondence with anyone, fully trusting her. Nicholas became more of a ghostly and distant memory. Rodrigo had long been living his own life: army, work as a stuntman, numerous women, and a son in between. Lucha now sent messages very rarely. She had grown up, got married, and was raising a daughter. Josefa was infinitely grateful to her for never betraying her, for being a true close friend who didn't abandon her in a difficult moment. Senor Segura was stunned when he saw signs of funeral preparations near one of the entrances of the building where Josefa's taxi had arrived. He observed 2 men setting up stools near the entrance to place the coffin for the farewell. Women bustled around, trying to arrange flowers and funeral wreaths beautifully. He could think of nothing better than to give his taxi driver a couple of bills with a request to find out who was being buried. The taxi driver returned quite quickly with the report. The neighbors said they are seeing off a well-known lawyer in the city, a woman. She died suddenly from a stroke after finding out about her son's tragedy. He was involved in a serious accident, after which his leg was amputated. He's still in the hospital, in bad condition, and won't even be able to attend his mother's funeral. Antonio couldn't understand. What did his wife have to do with these people? Could it be that this misfortune happened to her lover? Meanwhile, Josefa had indeed finally gotten out of the taxi right at the entrance, prepared for the ceremony, and disappeared into the building. He was burning with impatience, but for now, nothing was happening. He had to test all his internal restraints. At the same time, in the hospital, Rodrigo was burning in the fire of hellish doubts. He found Josefa because he was in a completely hopeless situation. Shooting in a snowy city with the participation of an old, heavy motorcycle did not foresee anything unusual. Everything went wrong from the start. The detective story set in old times didn't come together. The director forced them to shoot new takes over and over. The brave policeman rushing to the scene at full speed. They say it's useless to hide from fate. If misfortune wants to find you, it will do so anywhere. It was a small, frozen puddle under a layer of snow. Rue didn't even realize how it happened that the motorcycle skidded on ice, flipped over on him, mercilessly crushing, squashing the limb pressed to the snow-covered ground. Pain shock, the bustling emergency doctors, the pale, bloodless face of the director and colleagues, carrying him to the ambulance on stretchers. Already in the trauma department's reception, the doctor's conclusion was uncompromising: leg amputation was inevitable. In this case, from the small fragments, we can't assemble anything. We need to hurry to prevent inflammation or, worse, gangrene. Everything here is crushed and shattered that could possibly be. Rue pleaded with the people in white coats, whispering, "Please don't, I can't live without my leg. I have a son, my mom is often sick. Can't you do anything? I don't believe it. You just don't want to bother with me." Rodrigo would start to deliriously thrash about in bed, then again plead with everyone around to spare him. He was in a state of madness. To somehow bring him out of this moral coma, the hospital urgently decided to find his mother, Senora Sevilla. The woman rushed to the hospital within half an hour. She cried, hugged her son, comforted him. From the outside, it might seem that Rodrigo was weak. A cruel fate befell the man to suffer in silence. What nonsense! Only someone who has never been in such a dire situation could say that. Senora Sevilla felt like she was in the epicenter of a terrible, hopeless nightmare, but she held up wonderfully, not a tear, not a sigh. She hugged her son by the shoulders, whispered in his ear, "We'll get through this, my dear, my good boy. I'll be with you. We'll raise Nicholas, you'll finally meet your true love. Everything will be all right." Banal words. What, after all, is customary to say when someone is in serious trouble? Does anyone know the answer to that question? Senora Sevilla was by her son's side all the time after the operation, not leaving the room for a minute. It was just Rue and her against the whole world. Her and his friends didn't count, though she did take some actions. She left the hospital for 3 hours to visit Nicholas, who was temporarily living with her old friend at their house. While her son slept, she wrote a short and clear note. It contained just a few words, merely Josefa's coordinates. She sternly told her friend, "Open this envelope with the information only if I'm gone. It contains all contacts of Nicholas's mother. Don't cry, anything can happen. I must be prepared for any turn of events." Rue's mother passed away quietly in her sleep, right in the hospital at her young man's feet. More precisely, now at her son's single remaining foot. The autopsy showed it was a stroke, utterly incompatible with life due to the severity of the cerebral vessel damage. Rue did not find his mother alive in the morning. A nurse who entered the room at night took quick actions, and he was sleeping soundly after a hefty dose of painkillers. He and Nicholas were left alone. The next day, Senora Sevilla's friend called Josefa in another city, asking what to do: contact child services, or would the biological mother take the boy herself? It would be difficult for Rodrigo to raise him alone now, especially after prosthetics and a long rehabilitation. What followed was a continuous chain of ambiguous events. Josefa asked the woman who called her to get Rodrigo's phone, dialed her first love's number. The conversation was difficult. At first, Rue didn't even want to hear about her helping. He softened only after Josefa, intuitively, told him she had been following Nicholas's life all these 11 years. She cited examples of minor details impossible to fabricate, adding strong arguments. "Rue, don't rush into anger, calm down, think. You're not risking anything, but for Nicholas, it could all end quickly and badly. Without much consideration, he'll be quickly sent to an orphanage. For a homegrown boy, that would be a tragedy. All these years, especially after the birth of her son and daughter in her marriage with Antonio, Josefa had regretted so many times that she once, under her mother's influence, gave up the boy. She didn't have the strength to prove anything to anyone. She was ready to sacrifice herself. It was unknown how her husband would react to the news that she had another child, born in her youth. What if it doomed their happy marriage? What if he couldn't forgive her silence, this secret? Josefa loved Antonio very much. And somehow, even after years of living together, she confessed to him that she fell in love with him the moment he invited her for a talk at the choreography department. He entered the office, swift, handsome, and charming, impossible. She didn't care how their conversation would end, why he had called her. Only that this moment never ended. Later, working in his company, she quietly waited, let him only notice, let him be close as long as possible. When she realized she also appealed to him, she was overjoyed. Now, for Nicholas, she went so far as to risk everything. She would meet the boy in person, meet with Rue at the hospital, and then tell her husband everything. Not right this moment, a bit later. When everything inside her was sorted out neatly. Sonora Sevilla's friend greeted her all in tears. Rue was bedridden. The funeral arrangements were being handled by colleagues of the well-known lawyer and neighbors. Everyone wanted to give the admirable woman a dignified send-off. In the kitchen, beside a cup of coffee and a bun spread with butter and jam, Nicholas was in distress. The boy had been told about the tragedy in their home, first with his father and then with his grandmother. He was trying his best to hold himself together, but couldn't swallow even a bite. He was no longer a baby. He understood that his past tranquil, cozy life was over and the future was unclear. Sonora Sevilla's neighbor, an old-school woman, didn't beat around the bush and said directly, "Meet your mother, Nicholas. Her name is Josefa. Now we will all go outside, say goodbye to your Grandma Rita, and then you will leave with your mother, as it should be." Suddenly, there was a knock at the apartment door. The hostess went to answer, while Josefa reached out to the boy. "Nicholas, all these years we were apart, and that's a huge fault of mine towards you. Later, I will tell you the whole truth, but for now, don't be afraid. You have a brother and a sister, and I have a wonderful husband, remarkable, honorable, kind. I really hope he can forgive me for a mistake of my youth. All this is very complicated, but I'll try to make us all happy." Nicholas allowed himself to be embraced, scrutinized Josefa from head to toe, and whispered thoughtfully, "You are very beautiful. But what about Dad? Will we also take him to my brother and sister? Or do you want to leave him here alone without a leg?" A male voice responded from the corridor, hearing which Josefa nearly fainted. "Of course, your dad will come with us. How could it be otherwise?" Josefa threw herself into her husband's arms. She had no words, only her shoulders shook with sobs. "But how, Tony? Where did you come from? Weren't you supposed to be in Munich? So, you heard everything?" "Yes, Josefa, I heard everything. The only thing I really regret is that you didn't tell me earlier about what happened to you in your distant youth." The woman couldn't calm down, pacing the room, grabbing her husband and son by the hands. Then she couldn't resist asking her beloved husband about what now troubled her. "Antonio, what are we going to do with the three of us if Rodrigo moves in with us?" Senor Segura smiled kindly and answered in his usual manner, "What else? We'll dance a tango for three." Rue was diligently hosing down the dust around the outdoor pool. It was no small matter. Today the house was hosting a large gathering for Nicholas's 15th birthday. Antonio and Josefa were run off their feet preparing for the celebration. And his wife, Lola, being 7 months pregnant, wasn't much help now. The children's nannies for Antonio and Josefa's kids were barely managing their duties. Fortunately, the kids were grown enough to not require as much attention from adults. Upstairs, in a room, a friendly trio of Nicholas and Antonio and Josefa's children were trying on pirate costumes. Though the theme of a maritime party might have been cliché, it was the birthday boy's wish. Voyages on water were his weakness. Plus, he was nervous. His classmate Maria, whom he had secretly been in love with since the 6th grade, was invited. What if she didn't appreciate his Jack Sparrow costume? Senor Segura was at his desk in the office, reviewing drafts for a major order from a German company with a branch in his homeland. For years ago, they had flown to Munich together with Josefa and the 3 children. They even managed to visit the famous Bavarian attraction, Neuschwanstein Castle, in the town of Fussen. Antonio and Josefa had already visited this royal residence of Ludwig too. Now, they wanted to show its alpine beauty to the younger generation. Later, the German partners greatly assisted Senor Segura in making a prosthesis for Rodrigo. Despite his vehement resistance, after coming to them for Nicholas a year after the injury, he ended up staying in the house. First, there was a period of training and getting used to the clinic's prostheses, then he realized he had also grown fond of this warm, hospitable family. Initially, he simply helped around the house, then fell in love with Lola, and thus stayed. In the vast estate, there was always work for everyone, keeping all occupied. Only one person never crossed the threshold of this house, Josefa's mother, Sonora Jimenez. She could not reconcile that things hadn't turned out as she would have liked. She sits alone in her house by the flower beds, but that was her choice. Sometimes, after a hard week, the house hosts ballroom dance evenings for themselves. Rue and Josefa always dance the tango milongero. The man's prosthesis works so seamlessly that no outsider or casual observer ever suspects that the partner is missing a leg. In such moments, Antonio admires his wife and thinks, everyone makes mistakes in life, and how things turn out largely depends on who is by your side, who can understand, forgive, and accept others' faults. As the Almighty teaches, let him who is without sin cast the first stone.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.